Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alisa Bitonia, a real estate entrepreneur who is dedicated in helping you make safe, smart, and profitable real estate investment, especially in Lagos. Today's episode is one you don't want to miss because we are joined by a seasoned real estate lawyer, Mr. Fortune Beredem, who is here to break down the legal side to owning a property so you don't fall into traps or lose money. So before we dive right into the question, let's set the tone. So Fortune, why do you think it's necessary for an investor to work with a lawyer before purchasing a property?
Well, thanks for having me, Tonia.
You're welcome.
Why it's necessary to have a lawyer is because from where I see it, there are different interests, right? You have the person who is selling, you have the person who wants to buy, you have the person who brings them together, right? So all of these people have different interests, the agent and his commission, the buyer and his return on investment, and the person who wants to sell for profit. So I think the only person who has an interest that talks about safety or risk management is the lawyer. So that's where you need someone who is not thinking about how to close the deal. You need someone who is thinking about how to make sure this investment is safe for everybody. Yeah, so that's why you can't deal with lawyers in real estate transactions.
All right, that's beautiful. Right, so okay, let's kick things off already. So the first question we have here says, from the legal perspective, right, what do you recognize as real estate investments? What actually counts as investing in real estate?
Well, from the a lot of people have termed a lot of things investments, real estate investment. Okay. Everybody now, if you speak to most people that, oh, I'm a real estate investor, or I advise real estate investment. So it's now tricky to say what investment is in real estate. Okay. Right? So there are different levels, there are different transactions that come under real estate investment. You have property acquisition, you have lease. Okay. More recently, you start having things like short lets. Yes. There are certain schemes that run across trust. So yeah, there are a couple of things that could count as real estate investment, but I think the most important thing is where does money go to and what comes out. So there's investment and profit. So as long as you can drive investment and profit around the real property space. Yeah, you're speaking about investment. So there are different mechanisms that the law could recognize, not necessarily from the past, but I mean the law evolves. So yeah, things like shortlets, they were in available time like 10 years ago, but now they are very prevalent, and that's how people now look to like quick schemes to make money off the real estate sector. Yeah, so yeah, a couple of things can be considered real estate investment.
Flippy considered a real estate investment?
Well, flipping, yes, it is. I mean, if you can drive profit from that, yes, it is. Okay, yeah, so it is. As long as you're driving profit in a safe manner for yourself, for your investors, and yeah, it's real estate investment.
All right. So the second question that we have here says, in Lagos State specifically, what are the officially recognized property titles, and based on current practice, are there any other titles that people now accept informally?
Well, in Lagos State, I mean, I think it goes across the country, right? Because yes, I mean, yes, business is in Lagos, but yeah, when it comes to property title, it goes all the way across the country. Yeah. So what are those titles that are like officially recognized? You have the C of O.
Yes.
And then I think that comes under, I know that there are two ownership forms in Nigeria. Property ownership. One is less popular now, that's the freehold. But under the leasehold is where you have the C of O. And then following from that, you now have things like governor's consent. Yeah. There are also other titles like excision and all that. But
yeah.
in terms of official titles, I think those are the ones you come across more
prominently. Is Gazette an official title?
Yeah, it's sort of like, it's a title. Okay. So, but it's sort of like, I regard it as a documentation system.
Oh, okay.
Right, because for excision, when the property is excised, it's now documented in the official gazette. Oh. So yeah, it's something that speaks to title to property. Okay. But when you look at like maybe kind of documents, you count your title documents as your C of O, your governor's consent, and the like. So, but then in terms of unofficial title documents or things are now informal things are now being recognized as title documents. I think that's where in the recent times, maybe the last 4 to 5 years, you start catching things like registered survey.
Yes.
Registered survey, as much as it can give you confidence, but is it absolutely like title document? No, it is not. And that's why you tend to hear things like there's a registered survey and C of O is in view or in process.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think most people proceed on that because for C of O, when you get your C of O, the property value goes up.
Yes.
So yes, if you're willing to take that risk where you proceed before C of O is granted, then you can shoulder your price at that at the range you're buying, and then see the process through. It could be a while, it could take a while, it could take a year, it could take 2 years. Perfection in Lagos is still unfortunately slow, but yeah, it's something where I believe the government is going to do something about. But yes, you have things like register survey, and is it valid as informal title documents?
Yeah. So if I want to get a property for a client, when I see registered survey, I should also look out for C of O in view for us to feel safer. The registered survey already gives you the confidence, but knowing that there is plan to
obtain a C of O
and get a C of O.
Yes.
All right.
So you most likely find that as a process that is in view.
That's in view. Okay, that's beautiful. So the third question that we have here says, what are some of these things people tend to overlook when buying property? I mean, certain behaviors that could actually pose a danger to their investment.
So for things people tend to overlook, it could come on both sides, but I think our interest is in the investor, right?
Yes,
because that's where the risk is. Because that's the person parting with money. So yeah, things, and it's a function of their own doing, and it's unfortunate. Well, I'll say there are things that they need to look out for. One thing investors tend to do, and it also affects us lawyers, is they tend to rush the process. Okay, that's one. They tend to rush the process, and that's for investors who are even working with lawyers, because if I'm not involved, then I really don't know what your process looks like. So so they tend to rush the process, and when you rush the process, there are things you would overlook. Valid due diligence, or let's just say due diligence, because due diligence cuts across several things. Everybody can do due diligence. You as the investor, you can do your due diligence, but there are things that a lawyer would definitely do different. So yes, so they tend to rush the transaction, and when you rush a process, there are things you might not spot at the time. Things may crop up later that you could have probably identified if you gave a bit of time. And then another thing investors tend to do is say, well, I know this person, so I don't really need a lawyer for this process. You know the lawyer, you know the seller, you know yourself as the buyer, but do you really know the property?
Or what if the seller already has a lawyer that did the legal work
for him? So
selling.
Well, you want to, there are instances when you want one lawyer to deal for both parties, and when maybe the sum is meager, the property value is not much, right? You could deal with one lawyer for both parties, but in general, you want to have, because in most cases you really never know your seller, so you want to have your own lawyer look at your own transaction and have someone who you're confident tells you the truth.
So they shouldn't overlook that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump right into the next question. When buying a property, what are the key things a lawyer looks out for? Or what are those things that only your lawyer can adequately advise you on that would be overlooked if you were not working with one? Hey, this is not playing. Okay.
Well, I think I like these questions because it gives me the opportunity to speak to things that people don't get to hear on a daily basis. Yeah, I like the questions, and to be very frank, what are those? There are certain things a lawyer would see. Lawyers are trained. Well, other people, you could have some of those skill sets that lawyers have, but when you train somebody to do a certain thing, it's easier for them. If you're telling me about property, I'm not thinking return on investment instantly. My first thoughts are around safety of investment, valid title, things of that nature. So when a lawyer is looking at a transaction, he's seeing it differently. So what are the things that a lawyer could look up for? Maybe, is your title valid? Yes, you can easily tell that by yourself if you know how to study a reciter or devolution of property. But if I look at the property, a transaction, I can spot risks quickly. Perhaps someone tells me, oh, bring a certain amount, and then this is your investment and this is your return. My brain is thinking, where is the risk in this transaction? Whereas the seller is thinking, how do I get this guy to buy fast? The buyer, no, I'm on any side actually. I just want my core is a safe investment. So for the investor, he's thinking his core is return on investment. So that's why, if you recall the initial question, we're like,
his brain that talks about safety.
So that's like, where is the interest? what is every party's interest? The agent is looking at commission, the seller is looking at profit, the buyer is looking at return on investment, or even having if they don't count it as an investment, maybe property for use, for personal or family use or something. They are looking at safety, but my core thought is risk.
Yes.
Safety
so
of
you don't
investment.
need you don't need the profit.
Exactly.
You don't need the money.
Our joy is 10 years down the line. There was no other discussion around this process.
I understand.
Yeah, everything was done right from the start.
Yeah.
And all the risks were looked at.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
True. All right. So next question that we have here says, let's talk about the monile issue. What role do they play when it comes to real estate investments in Lagos? Are they beneficial, detrimental, and how do lawyers usually manage that relationship?
The way you said monile, my first thought was problems.
Exactly, like
there was problems, but I like the way the question turned out.
Yeah.
Right, because if you look at this thing critically, monilas are, how I see it, they're not necessarily a pain.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And I think they're useful to certain kinds of, like I said, real estate investment cuts across different kinds of transactions. You have property acquisition, and even on the property acquisition level, you still have different kinds. Are you acquiring a family land, a community land, or a communal land, or is there a communal ownership on that land, or are you buying from an individual, from an organization, different things like that. So so there are still levels to it, but how do monilas come to play? You can either be on their good side. I find it profitable in a sense where if you don't deal with them today, you might deal with them in the future.
Yeah.
But if you deal with them today, you can solve all the problems that could arise. And the good thing is, these people actually know a lot about that property more than you do. Sometimes even more than the seller, because the seller might have bought that property a year ago. Okay. But that monila has known that property for the last 10 years of their lives. Yeah. Do you understand? So you can use it to your advantage. But just know that whatever pending obligation to them is sorted either by you or by the previous seller. So you have to know that, okay, because they don't give you problems unless you owe them, or there are certain things that were supposed to be done and weren't done. So you just have to look out for those things that were to be done and weren't done, ensure they are done by who is supposed to do them. Or if you want to do them by yourself, you just have to factor in how do you negotiate this into the purchase process.
Actually, personally, I advise investors to actually go for a land that a company must have sorted all of this with. You know, when you're buying a family land directly from the family, you tend to face omonile and stuff like that. But when you're buying a land from a company, a reputable company with a good track record, right? You wouldn't have to deal with omonile because the company deals with them before they actually start selling that project.
Exactly. So it's like they brought it together. When you're buying a family land, you have to ensure you've spoken to all the value representatives
involved,
the head of the family, and you might not know the head of the family.
Exactly.
Right. So the monila knows the head of the family, knows the entire family history, knows who is outside of Nigeria, knows who is not part of this conversation today and needs to be part of. So when a company has done this, it makes it easy because now you have just one person to deal with.
So please, the person that asked this question, if you're not a developer, just look for a reputable company. We can walk you through that. You buy from a reputable company who has already gone through the entire stress of settling on monile. So you don't have to encounter monile. All right, so next question, yes. When buying property in Lagos from a developer, what are some of those concerns you would typically advise clients about? What questions should buyers ask to minimize risk? Are there investigations you would personally carry out for your clients?
Well, when buying from a developer, let's say Lagos, for example, you tend to find, let's say, different things like estates, right? Yeah, there are still developers who build and sell single units. But now you also have developers that are selling in estates. So if I want to buy from a developer, or if I have a client who wants to buy from a developer and I'm supposed to conduct the due diligence, these are the things I will look out for. First, I want to ask necessary questions. What is this company's track record in terms of delivery? Right? In terms of delivery. How many estates do they have? Is that the first? If that's the first, it's not necessarily an evil. Right, because in being a test subject is not necessarily a bad thing. The outcome could still be good. But if they have a track record of, let's say, estates in the past that they've built and delivered, it gives you more confidence and more comfort.
Proceed,
right. So, and then the other thing I would like to know is, at what point do I get allocation? let's say, for example, if it's on an off-plan basis,
Yes.
at what point does my client get allocated?
Allocated.
Right? And yes, you wouldn't expect allocation right from when you make your initial deposit. Yes, so you want to know, like,
Of course.
at what point during my transaction life cycle
Yeah.
is allocation going to be
Going
done?
to be given to
And
me,
then
yes.
how do you tie that and make it sacrosanct? Because they could tell you it would happen in so time,
Yeah.
and it doesn't happen. So if you don't put necessary checks in place,
Please.
so I want to ask questions like, what is the delivery like? If you've built estates before, I'd like to visit those estates to see
Sure.
infrastructure deployment.
Very
You didn't just
important.
drop an estate with people to live in without necessary amenities.
Yes.
Right, and then there are still, I mean, there are a lot of questions to ask, which I'm sure we wouldn't be able to take on this call.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's true though. I agree with
So you
that.
cannot-
I
yeah.
agree with that. All right. So the next question says, now talking about due diligence, what are the various stages an investor should go through before committing funds to a property or project? What specific processes should be undertaken?
Okay, let's
Yeah.
say due diligence in general. Like I said before, everybody can do due diligence. You, as the person bringing clients together, buyer and seller, you would do your due diligence.
Of course.
The person buying would do the due diligence. The person selling, there's still another level of due diligence that they want to, just to ensure they have the comfort of sale, because they don't want to sell and nobody wants problems in the future.
And not be
So
able to sleep.
exactly. So yeah, so there are different levels. But let's say as lawyers, what do we typically do?
Yeah.
If you ask me, the first thing when I get hold of a transaction, there are different levels of checks I'll do depending on the kind of transaction. If it's an acquisition, if it's a lease, if it's a like different levels of transactions, right?
Yeah.
So what I want to do is, if it's a family land, I want to ensure I speak to all members of the family concerned.
Yeah.
There are representatives, family representatives. There is the head of the family. I want to speak to the head of the family as well. I don't want to. I want to speak to the omonile. So you can imagine. So that's why I said it could be useful. I want to speak to the omonile who tells me I am speaking to everybody, so that the transaction doesn't end today and one person says, I wasn't aware this property was sold. And you would be very unfortunate if that's the head of the family, because that entire transaction is void. So if a representative is absent, it's voidable, and that's a different discourse. But if the head of the family is absent, it's void ab initio. From the start, your transaction is bad. So I want to make those checks. Definitely, you have things like you conduct search at the lands registry. If it's something that is likely subject to litigation, you want to do a lease pendings check, where you check if there's any existing litigation on this property and how it was resolved or how it is going. Right? So things like that. You also want to go physically check these properties, and then you could go with other professionals to ascertain topography. Is this place easy for me to build? Do I need to negotiate maybe because I might need some sand filling and things like that? So yeah, different levels of due diligence, but it cuts across the lands registry, the court registry, physical questioning. You have to ask questions physically, meet people who live around there and ask questions. So yeah, so these are sort of things I would do before I get enough comfort to tell my client to proceed.
Okay, I understand that. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I was going to ask, this person said for before committing funds to a property or a project. So this sounds like the due diligence for a project, right? So what about a single property, maybe from a developer?
Well, I think it's still almost one and the same.
Okay.
But it could apply with different severity.
Okay.
So yes, if I'm buying from a single individual, the need to speak to people would not be so much there. So I want to check the documents he has provided for me at the land registry, carry out necessary checks at the court registry to be sure there is no I mean, sometimes you could even extend your search to the CAC process just to know if you're buying from a company.
CAC, right?
So if you're buying from a company, you want to check, because there's an obligation to file charges and things like that. So you want to know if there is some form of charge on anything. Like, well, there are different levels to these things. So it's difficult to ascertain exactly what you would want to do.
Yeah, but these are
but once you're dealing with a real estate, because if a company has a charge, it's likely that you use a property for that purpose. You want to be sure it's not your property. You want to be sure it's not the property you are buying. So exactly. So there are different levels of checks to be done.
All right, that's fine. I hope that answered your question, the person that asked this question. All right, so the next one is what agreements are relevant under different real estate transactions, whether it's a lease, a sale, or another investment angle? What documents should a serious investor expect to sign?
Right. So I'm tempted to tell this person to, speak to a lawyer. But yes, I'm here. So, and because I'm on this channel, I like to make it useful.
Okay.
Right. So there are a couple of agreements that cut across the industry. Right. But common things you find in a core sale and purchase processes: your contract of sale and the deed of assignment. There are different other documents but in terms of agreements, you're looking at either a contract of sale if it's an acquisition, right? You could also have, because I think the person mentioned different transactions. So if you're looking at a lease, you're looking at a deed of lease or sublease, as the case may be. Even short letter, still short letter agreements. So the most important thing is the agreement in question. Does it tie the entire transaction? Does it cover from A to Z? Right, so you could name it. Sometimes they call it a contract of sale. It could be a conveyancing agreement. So different names for this, or a sale of land agreement. So it could be, but yes, typically it's a contract of sale of land. So so you have the contract of sale of land. You have the deed, either a deed of assignment or deed of conveyance or something like that.
The person should look out for a contract of sale, right, and a deed of assignment.
Or just say they look out for a contract and a deed. It could be a deed of lease, it could be a deed of sublease, depending on the transaction, since the person wants to know across.
Which is why he or she should speak to a lawyer.
Exactly.
All right, so this is the last question that we'll have here. So and in these documents, what are the key terms you personally look out for? What are some clauses that, if missing or poorly drafted, will make you advise a client to walk away or renegotiate?
Well, it's difficult to tell your client what to do, especially when you're working with a stubborn person. But there are things I would look out for, and I think it depends on what transaction I'm on. Say, for example, if I'm buying from, how we mentioned the register survey. I want to ensure there is some form of indemnity to cover my client. If that CRO process you told me is in view doesn't turn out successfully. Right. And then there are also, let's say, if you're buying into an estate from a developer and then they've given you certain things like your contract of sale already, you want to look through, because it's likely that estate that is being sold, the perfection process is still going on. Because I think developers start selling while that process is ongoing, because it's a very long process. You don't want to wait till the end of that before you start making value for. Because even if you wait 2 years, you make it more expensive for your investor. You reduce the value of their investment. So while that is going on, I would like, again, an indemnity that says the outcome of this process is, I'm protected regardless of the outcome of this process. So if there's a valid contention to property title, I want to ensure my investment comes back. So that's where the indemnity comes in. There are other clauses that you want to look at. Also, one important thing, you want to look at the recital. I encourage people to understand, because an agreement is drafted for everybody to understand. But yes, it's drafted for the lawyer to criticize or put holes where needed. So it's important for you to be able to study your recital, and if you do not understand, tell the lawyer to explain it to you. The property moved from A to B. There are several technical terms that will be used, so you could make it less readable or understandable to you as an investor, but tell your lawyer to tell you in simple terms, Mr. A bought, Mr. B bought from Mr. A. And that's how you got to you, who is Mr. C. Or let's say the family, the property was partitioned. For some people, what do you mean by partition? So a portion of the family land was partitioned and sold to, or given to so person to sell. Because if there is like a family ownership over a 1 hectare and I'm entitled to a certain portion, if I want to sell my portion, there's something called a partitioning that would happen. So what documented that process? If it's mentioned in that recital, I want to understand it. So most times people just feel like, oh, I need to sign. He gave me an agreement, and then they realize that they really don't know the content of the agreement 5 years down the line. So there are things to look out for, but essentially it's always just important to get a lawyer to do it for you. So I kind of emphasize that point.
True. That's fair enough. All right, I think that's the last question that we have here. Thank you so much. It's been quite an insightful episode, and I hope your questions were actually answered correctly. But if there are more things you might want to know, you can always drop me a comment, all right? And I'll definitely take it up from there, okay? Thank you so much.
When you take it up from there, I'll be charging you for the question and answer after this call.
That's
But
fine, no
anyways,
problem.
I'm happy to have done this, and
Thank
I hope your
you.
investors are more enlightened
Yeah,
and can
I hope
approach their
so.
investment process more smartly.
Yes, I
Right.
hope so. You must agree with me that that was quite an insightful session. So if you're looking to invest in real estate, especially in Lagos or even anywhere in Nigeria, make sure you're doing it the right way. And if you need guidance and you're looking to invest through a team that has legal backing from day one, then reach out to us at AT Realty. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe, and also drop your questions in the comments section. You never can tell, we might bring back Mr. Fortune for another banging episode. And also remember, smart investments are legal investments. See you in the next video. Bye.